My husband earned $3,500 a month and lived under my mother's roof for 4 years. My mother constantly belittled him, saying he had no backbone and was mooching off his wife's family. Then one day, he went to work and never came back. When I went to his company to look for him, the manager's words left me absolutely dead inside. I am 29 years old, the age people often call the peak of a woman's life. I have a career that many would envy, holding the position of regional marketing director for a multinational corporation. With an annual income of no less than $250,000, I live with my mother in a luxury high-rise condo in downtown Manhattan, New York. It is a life of abundance, elegance, and everything is arranged exactly to my liking. Everything in my life seemed to be perfectly under my control, except for one thing, my own marriage. My husband's name is Kyle. He wasn't the man I chose, but the man my mother chose, or rather, the one she settled on after many failed matchmaking attempts. 4 years ago, when I had just turned 25, my mother started getting anxious. She was terrified that her highly successful, overly picky daughter would end up an old maid. Then Kyle appeared. He was the son of an old friend from my mother's hometown in the Midwest, who had moved to New York to work as an IT technician for an electronics company. My mother didn't choose him because he was brilliant or wealthy, but because he had a gentle, honest demeanor and, most importantly, an ordinary background. My mother said that by marrying a man like him, her daughter would never be bullied and she would hold all the power in the household. At the time, I fiercely objected. How could I, a marketing director, marry a lowly technician, making $3,500 a month? It felt like an insult. But my mother used every tactic in the book, from crying and threatening to declaring she would disown me if I didn't listen. Finally, I closed my eyes and stepped into a loveless marriage, with one strict condition: Kyle had to move into our apartment. My mother was thrilled. She believed that forcing Kyle to live under her roof asserted our family's dominance and served as a test to ensure he wasn't a gold digger. For the past 4 years, Kyle lived in this condo exactly in the role of a live-in dependent, perhaps even less. He was never allowed to sit at the table during our family's dinner parties, and he was never formally introduced to my friends or business partners. In my eyes and my mother's, he was just a shadow, an unpaid servant, an existence so faint that sometimes I forgot I even had a husband. Our condo has 3 bedrooms, my large master suite, my mother's room, and a smaller room that used to be a study, which was cleared out for Kyle. On our wedding night, I told him bluntly, "We sleep in separate rooms. Do not ever step foot into my room without permission." He just silently nodded, without a single word of protest or a single question. His shockingly easy acceptance only deepened my contempt for him. I saw him as a man with no self-respect and no opinions of his own. Our lives drifted by in extreme coldness. During the day, I threw myself into my work, meetings, business trips, and lavish corporate galas. I built the image of a successful, glamorous, single woman. No one at my company knew I was married. I didn't wear a wedding ring, and I never once mentioned the word family. When I came home at night, I would only see Kyle bustling around the kitchen, cooking dinner. Dinner usually consisted of just the 3 of us, but the atmosphere was as heavy as if a dozen strangers were sitting there. My mother and I would discuss business, shopping, or the wealthy men who were pursuing me. Kyle would just eat in silence, then quietly clear the table and wash the dishes. He was like a pre-programmed machine, emotionless and uncomplaining. I never asked him about his job, his friends, or his family back in Ohio. I simply didn't care. Deep down, I always considered this marriage a temporary rest stop. I was waiting for a man truly worthy of me to appear. A man who could stand with me at the pinnacle of success. When that time came, I wouldn't hesitate to kick this small-town technician out of my life. For 4 years, I lived with that mindset, with the arrogance of someone who always thought she was the center of the universe, completely unaware that the price of arrogance and short-sightedness is sometimes too expensive to ever pay back. If someone asked me about my husband's life over the past 4 years, I probably couldn't say much beyond the word dull. But if asked about what he did for my mother and me, I could list an endless scroll of things. Every morning, exactly at 6 a.m., Kyle was awake. He would go to the market to prepare breakfast for the household. My mother suffered from severe stomach ulcers, so she could only eat a delicate, slow-simmered chicken and rice broth. I, on the other hand, preferred a Western breakfast, artisanal toast with runny sunny-side-up eggs and a glass of fresh, unsweetened orange juice. He never once messed up our preferences. My mother's broth was always steaming hot and perfectly tender. My eggs always had the exact runny yolk I desired. After we left for work, he would clean the house. Our 1,500 square foot luxury condo was always spotless, without a speck of dust. My clothes and my mother's clothes were hand-washed separately by fabric type, dried, ironed flawlessly, and hung neatly in our closets. My mother had a small collection of rare orchids on the balcony, which she valued more than gold. Kyle took care of those orchids even more carefully than my mother did. He read books, researching exactly how to fertilize and water them properly. Thanks to him, my mother's orchid garden bloomed vibrantly every single year. If anything in the house broke from a light bulb or a leaky faucet to the complex smart washing machine, it only took Kyle a moment to fix it. My mother once sneered, "Well, at least he's handy. A typical tech guy. Other than that, he's completely useless." Kyle heard her, but he just remained silent, his hands still working swiftly. His silence infuriated me. I would have rather he argued back, got angry, so I would have an excuse to yell at him and humiliate him. But he didn't. He was like a deep well. Every ounce of contempt we threw at him sank without an echo. His endurance only made my mother push harder. She treated him no differently than a hired hand. Once, her friends came over to visit and saw Kyle mopping the floor. One oblivious friend asked, "Where did you hire such a hardworking, quiet housekeeper?" My mother scoffed and replied casually, "Oh, please, he's family." The boy came from a poor town, so I took pity on him and let him stay here out of charity. I sat there, hearing every word, but I didn't speak up to defend him. In my heart, at that moment, I actually felt my mother's words were reasonable. It was true. We were taking pity on him. I remember one time I came home late after entertaining clients, reeking of alcohol. As soon as I walked through the door, I vomited violently all over the hardwood floor. Kyle rushed over, supported me into my bedroom, and wiped my face with a warm towel. He even brewed me a hot ginger tea to sober me up. That entire night he sat by my bed keeping watch over me. When I woke up the next morning, the floor was spotless, showing no trace of the night before. My dirty clothes were already washed and clean, but instead of saying thank you, I just said coldly, "Don't ever enter my room without permission again." He looked at me, and in his eyes, there was something I couldn't read. Then he silently turned and walked away. Kyle's life seemed to revolve entirely around this apartment and us. He rarely went out, had no friends, and never partied. I never saw him buy himself a new set of clothes or a decent pair of shoes. The outfits he wore to work were just a few faded dress shirts and worn-out slacks. I assumed it was because he was poor, scraping by on pennies that barely covered anything. A few times, I threw him some of my late father's old suits, saying in a patronizing tone, "Take these and wear them. Don't let people see you and think this family mistreats you." He took them without a word, but I never saw him wear them. Thinking back on it now, I realized just how incredibly stupid I was. I lived with a man for 4 years, under the same roof, eating at the same table, yet I knew absolutely nothing about him. I didn't know exactly what he did at work, what his passions were, or what he dreamed of. All I knew was that he was a small-town technician making $3,500 a month, crashing at my place. I used that minimal, biased information to put a price tag on a human being, granting myself the right to judge and despise him. I was so confident in what I saw that I forgot that 90% of an iceberg is hidden beneath the surface. The winter holidays that year felt longer than usual. My company gave employees time off through the first week of January. The atmosphere in the house was as cold as ever. I was busy with appointments, meeting friends and partners, and attending New Year galas. My mother was out all day, visiting relatives and friends. Only Kyle stayed home. He was the one who cleaned the house, prepared the traditional holiday meals, and then cooked and served my mother and me after we returned from our outside festivities. He did everything silently, inconspicuously, as if it were his obvious duty. On January 8th, the first workday of the new year, I woke up quite late. By the time I walked out of my room, Kyle had already finished making breakfast. He was wearing his usual work clothes, a faded light blue dress shirt, and black slacks that were shiny at the knees from wear. He said to me, his voice as flat as usual, "I'm going to work. Your breakfast is on the table." I just gave a dismissive yeah, without even bothering to look at him. That was the last time I saw him in that house. That evening, I came home after a stressful day at work. I was surprised to find the apartment dark and freezing. Normally, at this hour, Kyle would already be home, cooking in the kitchen. My growling stomach made me irritable. I thought to myself, he's probably working overtime. A low-level company, and they still force him to do overtime. I lazily ordered fast food, ate it hastily, and went into my study to continue working. My mother came home later, noticed the empty house, grumbled a few words, and let it go. She also assumed Kyle was busy at work. Neither of us was the least bit worried. His absence merely caused a minor inconvenience in our daily routines. But the next day, Kyle still didn't come home. There was no one to prepare breakfast, and the house began to show signs of messiness. My mother started to look anxious. She paced back and forth in the living room, muttering, "Did something happen to him on the road? Could he have been in an accident?" I brushed it off entirely. "Mom, you worry too much. He's probably just throwing a tantrum and ran back to Ohio to sulk. Let it go. A man who clings to his wife's skirt has no self-respect. Let him throw his fit. Once he runs out of money in a few days, he'll come crawling back." My words seemed to reassure my mother, or perhaps she just wanted to believe them. But deep down, a vague sense of unease began to creep in. I tried to push it away by telling myself I had nothing to worry about. If he disappears, even better. The sooner I get my freedom, I would have a perfectly valid reason to file for divorce. An irresponsible husband who abandoned his home without a word. The script was too perfect. However, my tough exterior only lasted until the third day. Kyle was still completely MIA. I tried calling his phone a few times, only to hear the robotic voice of the operator. "The subscriber you have dialed is currently unavailable." The apartment, devoid of his quiet, lingering presence, suddenly became eerily empty and terrifyingly cold. The endless, nameless chores he did every day now had no one to shoulder them, and they began to manifest, causing a slow but certain chaos. My initial indifference slowly vanished, replaced by irritation, frustration, and something resembling worry. I didn't want to admit to this feeling, but it grew larger with every hour, every minute he wasn't home. The chaos didn't hit like a storm. It seeped into our lives like mold, slow and persistent. The first few days, Kyle disappeared. The biggest issue was just meals. My mother and I were not used to being in the kitchen. A family dinner suddenly became a luxury. We started living entirely on takeout, but eating expensive, rich restaurant food every day gets sickening. Nothing could compare to the simple, tailored dishes Kyle used to cook. My mother began complaining that her stomach ulcers were flaring up again. Then came the housework. The pile of dirty laundry grew into a mountain in the hamper. The hardwood floors started to feel gritty underfoot. No one wanted to wash the dishes, so they piled up in the sink. My mother's orchids began to wither because no one was tending to them. Every bit of order and neatness Kyle had silently maintained for 4 years completely collapsed. Our luxury high-rise condo now looked no different than a pigsty. That morning, as I was frantically getting ready for work, the water heater in my bathroom suddenly broke. An icy stream of water poured down, making me shiver violently. Frustrated, I hastily wrapped a towel around myself and ran out to call my mother. She fiddled with it for a bit before giving up helplessly. She sighed, "If Kyle were here, this would be fixed in a second. Now who do we call?" My mother's words were like a spark, igniting the anger smoldering inside me. Anger at my own helplessness, and anger at the man who had suddenly vanished, leaving us a massive mess to clean up. I snapped. "Why do you keep bringing him up? Are we going to starve to death without him? I'll call a repairman." I angrily looked up the number for an emergency plumbing service. Nearly an hour later, the technician finally arrived. He inspected it for a while, and then delivered a blunt verdict. This is severely broken, ma'am. The components are complex and need replacing. It's going to cost you a couple $1,000s. I froze. A couple $1,000s wasn't a huge issue for me financially, but I remembered a time when this exact machine had a similar malfunction. Kyle just tinkered with it for about half an hour using his rusty old toolbox, and it worked perfectly again. My frustration was now mixed with genuine panic. I began to realize my dependence on Kyle, a truth I never wanted to admit before. He wasn't just a husband in name. He was a butler, a personal chef, a handyman, a gardener, all rolled into one. He had managed everything so perfectly that my mother and I took it completely for granted. Now that he was gone, we finally realized what a crucial pillar we had lost. My initial anger slowly turned into a very real fear. Not fear for his safety, but fear for my own life. What if he never comes back? Are we supposed to live in this state forever? The pride of a successful female executive wouldn't let me admit that I needed him. I still tried to put on a tough front for my mother, insisting I could handle everything. But every night, lying in my massive bedroom, listening to the steady ticking of the clock, I felt an incredibly frightening emptiness. The unease grew larger, like a wild beast gnawing at my composure. I realized I had to do something. I couldn't just sit here waiting hopelessly. My patience, and my mother's, finally reached its limit on the morning of the 5th day since Kyle left. The night before, the main light bulb in the living room had blown out. The entire massive space was plunged into a dim, stifling darkness. My mother tripped on the edge of the coffee table and nearly fell. While rubbing her leg, she grumbled endlessly. "I can't take this anymore. Call his company right now. Ask them if he's going to work or if he's skipping out to hide somewhere. We need to get to the bottom of this." My mother issued an ultimatum, her voice sharp. In truth, I had already thought of doing this, but my pride held me back. Calling a husband's company to ask where he was felt like airing dirty laundry for the world to see, admitting my total failure in managing my own household. But looking at our current situation, I had no other choice. The inconvenience and chaos in the house had conquered my ego. I went into my room to lock the door tightly and searched my contacts for the landline of Kyle's company. It was a number I had never called, saved back when we were preparing for the wedding. My heart beat a little faster as I pressed call. I told myself I had to remain completely calm, to speak with the authoritative tone of a superior checking on a subordinate. After a few rings, a young female voice answered the line. "TK Electronics, how may I help you?" I cleared my throat, trying to sound as professional as possible. "Hello, I am Diana. I want to ask about one of your employees, Kyle Nguyen, in the technical department." "Oh. What is your relationship to Kyle?" the receptionist asked politely. This question made me pause for a second. What was my relationship? I was his wife. But I had never wanted to admit that to outsiders. I hesitated, then gave a vague answer. "I am family." "Yes, ma'am. What information would you like regarding Kyle?" "I want to know if Kyle has been coming into work the past few days, and what his schedule is." I got straight to the point. The other end was silent for a moment. I could hear the clacking of a keyboard. Then the receptionist replied, her voice tinged with surprise. You didn't know?" Kyle was transferred. My whole body froze. Transferred? Why wouldn't I know anything about this? He never said a word to me. Transferred where? Since when? My voice became hurried, losing its initial calm facade. "Yes, ma'am. He was transferred to the corporation's Central Research Facility in Nevada. The transfer decision was finalized before the winter holidays. He no longer works at this branch as of the new year." This information made my head spin. Before the holidays? If he was transferred before the holidays, then why did he put on his work clothes on the morning of January 8th and tell me, "I'm going to work"? Where did he actually go that day? He lied to me. The contradiction between the receptionist's words and Kyle's actions that morning left me extremely confused and suspicious. A series of questions popped into my head. Why would he hide something so important from me? What kind of place is a research facility in the remote Nevada desert? Can you give me more specific details about his new position or how to contact him? I tried to press for more. I'm sorry, ma'am. I really can't, she replied. This is an internal transfer from corporate headquarters and falls under classified status. Even at this branch, we don't know much. I only know he left to work on a highly critical project. Classified. Critical. Those two words echoed on loop in my head. What kind of critical, classified project would involve a lowly technician? This was completely absurd. After hanging up, I sat frozen in my chair. The information I just received didn't answer my questions. It only made everything infinitely more complex and mysterious. Kyle's disappearance was no longer simply him throwing a tantrum and running away. There seemed to be a truth behind it that I had never known. Suspicion and curiosity began to rise powerfully, overriding my anger and irritation. For the first time in 4 years, I truly wanted to know who the husband I had always looked down on actually was. I sat dead still in my room. The receptionist's words echoed in my ears. Transferred before the holidays. Research facility. Critical project. Classified. Every single word was like a shard of glass, piercing the arrogant worldview I had built for myself. Everything was contradictory and incomprehensible. Why did he lie? Why would a project so critical it required classified status be assigned to an ordinary tech? My mind was a tangled mess. I told my mother everything, but she was just as bewildered. She swung from assuming the company was running a scam to wildly guessing that Kyle was involved in something illegal and had to run away. My mother's speculations only gave me a worse headache. I knew I needed someone with a more objective perspective, someone who could help me untangle this mess. I immediately thought of Mia, my only best friend. Mia and I had been friends since college. She wasn't an explosive success like me, just a manager at a mid-sized PR firm, but she had a happy family and an incredibly clear, sharp mind. I called her and arranged to meet at a familiar coffee shop, a place quiet enough to talk privately. Sitting across from me, Mia patiently listened to the whole story. From Kyle's sudden disappearance and the chaos at home to the confusing phone call with his company. I told the story with an annoyed, dismissive tone, still trying to maintain the image of a wife suffering through the inconveniences caused by a useless husband. After listening, Mia didn't rush to offer advice. She gently stirred her coffee, looked at me intently, and asked a seemingly unrelated question. Diana, in the past 4 years, have you ever actually sat down and had a real conversation with your husband? I mean a genuine conversation about his work, about what he thinks. Mia's question stopped me cold. I wanted to blurt out yes, but the word wouldn't come out. A conversation? We never conversed. I gave orders, he obeyed. I criticized, he stayed silent. That wasn't a conversation. Seeing my silence, Mia sighed. She spoke slowly, enunciating every word. Diana, I think you're looking at this from completely the wrong angle. You've convinced yourself that Kyle is a mediocre nobody, so every action he takes looks suspicious and stupid through your eyes. But try thinking about it in reverse. She took a sip of coffee and continued. Being transferred to a research facility, located in a remote area, working on a critical and classified project. Doesn't this sound like a script meant for a genius? They only send the absolute best, the most trustworthy people to places like that. What value would a lowly technician, as you call him, bring for the corporation to do that? Every word Mia said was like a bucket of ice water dumped directly onto my face. I had never considered this possibility. In my mind, it was set in stone that Kyle was incompetent, so I couldn't even fathom an alternative scenario. Mia analyzed further. And about him lying to you on the morning of January 8th. Maybe he didn't want to lie. Maybe he wasn't allowed to tell the truth. Top secret, high-level projects have incredibly strict regulations about disclosing information, even to immediate family. Him saying, "I'm going to work," was probably the only thing he could say to avoid violating protocol without making you suspicious at the time. As for him silently enduring the contempt from you and your mother for 4 years, Mia looked straight into my eyes, her gaze somewhat stern. Maybe it's not because he's weak, but because he didn't value your insults. Truly brilliant people have their own internal world. They know exactly where their worth lies. Judgments based on superficial material things probably just blew past his ears like the wind. Have you ever considered that maybe your husband isn't the mediocre one, but it's actually your perspective that is mediocre? Mia's last sentence slammed like a sledgehammer into my pride. I was speechless, unable to argue back a single word. For the first time in my life, someone told me that my perspective was mediocre. I had always prided myself on my intelligence and sharpness. But through Mia's words, I suddenly saw myself as a frog living in a well, only seeing a tiny patch of the sky through the narrow opening of my own arrogance. The conversation with Mia didn't solve the problem, but it opened a door to a hypothetical world I had never dared to imagine. A world where my husband was not the man I thought he was. I returned home with a heavy head. Her words kept drilling into my mind, forcing me to look back at the last 4 years of my marriage through a completely different lens. I stepped into Kyle's room for the first time in years, not to issue an order or to berate him. The small room was sparsely furnished, but shockingly neat. Everything was in its exact place. My eyes landed on a small bookshelf tucked in the corner. Before today, I had never paid attention to what he read. I assumed a tech repair guy would at most read outdated textbooks or cheap pulp fiction. But now, looking closely, I was astonished. The shelves didn't hold what I expected. They held massive, thick hardcovers with titles that made my tongue twist just reading them. Artificial Intelligence, A Modern Approach, Quantum Computing Theory, Advanced Algorithmic Structures. They were all highly specialized, advanced texts. I flipped one open. The pages were dense with complex formulas and symbols that made me dizzy just glancing at them. Does a standard electronics repairman need to read things like this? Suddenly, I remembered the times I had accidentally seen him sitting in this room reading. He read with such intense focus that he wouldn't even notice me walking in. At the time, I just felt contempt, assuming he was trying to look like a fake intellectual. Now, that image returned with a completely different meaning. Then I remembered his phone calls. He usually went out to the balcony to take calls, probably to avoid bothering my mother and me. I only ever caught snippets, but they weren't idle chats. He used highly technical jargon, speaking with a highly professional and confident demeanor, completely different from his usual quiet, withdrawn self. Once, I heard him tell the person on the other end, "No, that solution isn't optimal. We have to refactor the entire core processing module, focusing on reducing the time complexity of the recursive algorithms." At the time, I didn't understand a word and just found it laughable. Thinking back, I realize I was the laughable one. Another fragment of memory flooded back. It was when my high-end corporate laptop suddenly suffered an OS failure, losing all my crucial data right before a major presentation. I frantically called our company's elite IT specialists, but they said it would take at least a day to fix. While I was in absolute despair, Kyle quietly took the laptop. He sat with it for about 2 hours, typing lines of code I couldn't comprehend onto a pitch-black screen. And miraculously, the laptop came back to life. All the data was perfectly restored. When I asked him how he did it, he just gave a gentle smile. Just consider it luck. At the time, I actually believed it was luck. I collapsed onto his bed, feeling dizzy. All the signs had been right in front of my eyes for 4 years. They were so obvious, yet I had completely failed to see them. Or rather, I had refused to see them. My arrogance and prejudice had blinded me, making me see only the image of Kyle that I had created for myself. A small-town boy, average education, mediocre job. Trembling, I opened my phone and went to his social media page. He rarely posted. He'd only upload a few landscape photos a year. But my eyes froze on a post from over a year ago. It was a photo he took of a vast, boundless ocean during sunset. Beneath the photo was a short caption: "The vast sea allows the fish to leap. The high sky allows the bird to fly." If I had read that quote before, I would have sneered and called him cheesy. But reading it now, in this context, it felt like a heavy sigh, a repressed yearning for freedom. Was this house, this marriage, the cage that had imprisoned him? And was his departure his way of seeking his own vast sea and high sky? I suddenly realized I knew nothing about this man, Absolutely nothing. I couldn't sleep a wink that night. Fragments of memories and speculations swirled in my head, creating a chaotic tornado. The image of the silent, enduring husband I had known for 4 years, and the image of a hidden tech genius Mia had sketched out. The two images overlapped and fought each other. I didn't know which one was the real Kyle. The feeling of not knowing, of not having everything under control, made me, someone who always prided herself on having a grip on everything, feel incredibly uncomfortable and anxious. The next morning, I woke up with dark circles under my eyes, but a clear decision had formed in my mind. I couldn't just sit here guessing forever. I couldn't live in this ambiguity for another day. I had to find the truth. The truth about who Kyle really was, about his job, and the reason why he left so quietly. I stood before the mirror, looking at my reflection. My face looked a bit exhausted, but my eyes were filled with determination. I no longer felt angry about the inconvenience Kyle caused. Instead, I felt a powerful urge, an unprecedented curiosity about the man I called my husband. It didn't stem from love or care, but from my own bruised ego. How could I accept that I had been deceived, or worse, that I had been deceiving myself for so long? I decided to take the day off work. I called my assistant, said I had a sudden family emergency, and canceled all my meetings. This was almost unprecedented. Up until now, work had always been my absolute #1 priority. But today, there was something more important: finding answers. I opened my closet and chose very carefully. I didn't pick my glamorous corporate dresses or expensive designer brands. I chose a sleek, minimalist, sharp black power suit paired with a crisp white blouse. I wanted to look strong, professional, and absolutely untouchable. This was not a visit from a wife looking for her husband. This was a business mission from a director seeking information. I applied light makeup, just enough to hide my fatigue and highlight the sharpness in my eyes. I had to hold the offensive position, the position of someone demanding answers, not someone begging for them. When I walked out into the living room, my mother asked in surprise, "Where are you going dressed so seriously? Didn't you take the day off?" I replied calmly, my voice without a shred of hesitation. "I'm going to Kyle's company. I need to meet his superior and get the full story." My mother looked worried. "Is that a good idea? What if they won't see you? Maybe we should just wait and see what happens." I cut her off. "I can't wait anymore. The longer I wait, the less I know. Stay home and relax, Mom. I'll handle it." With that, I grabbed my bag and walked straight out the door. Hearing the sharp clack-clack of my heels against the floor, I felt like a warrior preparing for battle, a battle to uncover the truth and to face my own sheer stupidity. No matter the outcome, no matter how brutal the truth was, I had to know. The office building where Kyle's company was headquartered wasn't a mega skyscraper, but it was very modern, located on a major avenue in Manhattan. I walked into the lobby. The work environment was far more professional and serious than I had imagined. I walked straight up to the reception desk. The young woman sitting there looked up, and I immediately recognized the voice from the phone. "Hello, I am Diana. I called you yesterday morning asking about Kyle Nguyen," I said decisively, placing my business card on the counter. The title Regional Marketing Director on the card seemed to carry a certain weight. The receptionist was slightly taken aback by my appearance. She looked at the card, then at me, looking a bit flustered. "Oh, hello, ma'am. But I already told you everything I know over the phone." "I know," I replied, keeping my voice calm but commanding. "But I didn't come here to hear what you already said. I need to see Kyle's direct manager. I have issues that need to be clarified with someone in charge here." My firm, professional demeanor clearly rattled her. She stammered, but Kyle's department head is in a meeting." "That's fine, I can wait." I pointed toward the leather sofas in the corner of the lobby. "But I think it would be best if your superiors knew that the family member of an employee is sitting out here waiting because of the company's opaque transfer protocols. I do not have a lot of time." My words were soft, but laced with a clear threat. The receptionist went a bit pale. She hastily picked up her desk phone, dialed an extension, and whispered something. A moment later, she put the phone down and said to me, her tone much more respectful, "Please follow me." Ma'am. Director Logan will see you." She led me down a long hallway. We arrived at a door bearing the plaque, Research and Development. She knocked and opened the door for me. Inside was a man in his 40s, tall and lean, wearing glasses, projecting a highly intellectual aura. He stood up from his desk as I walked in. "Hello, Diana. Please, have a seat." "I am Logan, Kyle's department head," he said, his voice deep and polite. He gestured to a small conference table in the corner of his office. His demeanor surprised me slightly. He knew my name, and the way he spoke about Kyle held a certain reverence, not how one speaks about an average subordinate. After I sat down, Director Logan personally poured me a cup of coffee. "I am very sorry for the inconvenience you've experienced. We should have sent a more formal notification to the family, but due to the highly sensitive nature of the project, everything had to follow strict security protocols. Director Logan." I cut straight to the chase, not wanting to beat around the bush. "I am here today because I just want to know the truth. Who exactly is my husband, Kyle Nguyen, and where did he go?" Director Logan looked at me, his eyes deep and unreadable. He pushed his glasses up his nose, clasped his hands together, and rested them on the table. "Diana, perhaps I should answer your question with another question. In the 4 years you've lived together, what kind of person did you think your husband was?" His question was like a small knife piercing straight into the darkest part of my heart. I sat in silence, not knowing how to answer. Because the only answer I had in my head at that moment was, "I don't know." And that truth made me feel deeply ashamed. Seeing my silence, Director Logan let out a soft sigh. It seemed he had anticipated my answer. He looked out the window, his gaze distant, as if recalling a long story. "Diana, Kyle is not an average technician," he began, his voice slow and clear. "He joined our company 6 years ago, right after graduating as the valedictorian of MIT's computer science department. Initially, he was just a programmer, like everyone else. But within 6 months, we realized he was a diamond in the rough." I listened, my heart beginning to pound harder. Valedictorian of MIT? Why had I never known this? Logan continued, his voice taking on a tone of excitement and pride. "Kyle's intellect far surpasses his peers. He has the ability to solve the most complex algorithmic bottlenecks that leave our entire team stumped. Over 2 years ago, our corporation hit a massive wall trying to optimize a big data processing algorithm for a core product. We invested millions of dollars, brought in foreign experts, but still had no breakthrough. The project was practically at a dead end." He paused, took a sip of his coffee, and looked directly at me. "It was Kyle who, when everyone else was ready to give up, single-handedly found a completely new approach. He personally built and proved a revolutionary algorithm that not only solved the problem but increased the system's efficiency tenfold. That invention of his saved the corporation tens, even hundreds of millions of dollars in R&D costs, and gave us an absolute competitive advantage in the global market." My head was ringing. Hundreds of millions of dollars. The man I always berated as incompetent, as a moocher, was the one creating that kind of massive value. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was too absurd, too irrational. Then, what about his salary of $3,500 a month? I asked a naive question. It was the only life preserver I could cling to in order to hold on to my outdated perception of him. Director Logan let out a soft chuckle, a smile laced with sympathy. "That is the base salary on the local employment contract he signed with the New York branch. That was Kyle's explicit request. He didn't want to draw attention to himself. His actual project bonuses, executive stock dividends, and all other income befitting a top-tier expert like him are paid directly by the corporate headquarters in Silicon Valley. I don't know the exact figures, but I can tell you it is more than enough to buy several luxury condos like the one you currently live in." My entire body went ice cold. Everything collapsed right before my eyes. My arrogance, my contempt, the insults I hurled at him for 4 years suddenly rushed back, cutting into my soul like a razor. My mother and I had lived in that apartment, likely spending the very money he earned, while ceaselessly degrading and looking down on him. No stupidity in the world could compare to this. Kyle is a genius, Director Logan concluded. But he is a silent genius. He never brags, never makes demands. He just wants to focus on his research, doing the work he is passionate about. We tried to conceal his true identity at his own request. We deeply respect his privacy. He looked at me, his eyes full of hidden meaning. Perhaps we respected his privacy a bit too much, to the point that even the wife he lived with for 4 years knew absolutely nothing. Director Logan's words held no accusatory tone, but to me right now, they hurt worse than a slap to the face. I sat paralyzed in my chair, feeling as if all the ambient sound in the room had been muted. Only Logan's words echoed, drilling into every corner of my mind. Genius, MIT valedictorian, hundreds of millions, massive income. These concepts were completely alien, impossible to attach to the image of the silent, enduring husband in my memory. Seeing my face turn ashen, Director Logan continued, his voice growing more serious. The reason I am telling you all this today is not to interfere in your family matters, but because I believe you have the right to know the real reason for Kyle's departure. He paused, giving me a moment to absorb the shock. After the success of that project, Kyle's talent was recognized by the highest levels of the corporation. Simultaneously, it caught the attention of certain federal government agencies. A few months ago, he was handpicked by name to join a top-tier national security technology project. This is a strategic initiative with massive implications for the defense and technological future of the United States. A national security project. The scale of the story had vastly exceeded my imagination. What started as a petty domestic dispute now involved monumental issues I had never even fathomed. This project is located at an isolated, highly secured research facility in the Nevada desert, Logan explained. Every member involved is a carefully selected top-tier expert, and because of its top-secret classification, everyone had to sign a highly restrictive non-disclosure agreement. He looked me straight in the eye, emphasizing every word. Kyle had to sign an NDA binding him for 6 years. For those 6 years, he must live and work entirely within the facility's perimeter. He is not allowed to use personal communication devices, cannot have contact with the outside world, and absolutely cannot disclose any information even to his family. All mail and communications are heavily monitored. It is a massive sacrifice, but a mandatory requirement to ensure the safety of the project and the participants. 6 years. That number fell like another sledgehammer on my head. 6 years, with no contact, no seeing each other. That meant his disappearance wasn't temporary. It was a predestined separation. A separation that would last longer than the time we had even been married. Then why? Why on the morning of January 8th did he still say he was going to work? I asked, my voice trembling. That was the last remaining knot in my mind. Director Logan gave a slight nod, as if he understood my question perfectly. According to the schedule, he had to report to the facility on the 9th. The transfer orders and paperwork were completed before the holidays. The morning of the 8th was probably time he set aside for himself. Maybe he wanted to take one last look at the place he had lived. I don't know for sure, but I believe that was his silent goodbye. He couldn't tell you the truth because that would have violated his NDA from the very first second. A silent goodbye. That phrase made my heart ache with a dull, throbbing pain. I remembered that morning. He stood at the door saying, "I'm going to work," in the same calm voice he used every day. And I replied with a dismissive yeah, without even bothering to turn and look at him. I didn't know that it was the last time. I missed the only goodbye he was allowed to give me. My callousness in that moment now became an unforgivable sin. I don't remember how I left his company, or how I drove home. Everything around me seemed blurred, leaving only a grayscale wash. The familiar streets suddenly felt alien. The bustling traffic, the honking horns, everything receded into the background, unable to touch my collapsing internal world. I sat behind the steering wheel, my hands gripping it until my knuckles turned white, yet my body felt completely devoid of strength. My head was filled with a chaotic mess of images and sounds. Images of Kyle bustling in the kitchen, quietly mopping the floor, carefully tending to the orchids. Images of him reading thick textbooks, his face intensely focused and passionate. The image of him smiling gently after fixing my laptop. Interwoven with these were Director Logan's words: genius, MIT valedictorian, hundreds of millions, national security project, 6 years. These two conflicting streams of imagery and sound violently crashed into each other, pulverizing everything I had ever believed in. Stupidity. That was the only word I could use to describe myself right now. A stupidity so profound it was unimaginable. I, a regional marketing director, a woman who always prided herself on her ability to read people, on her sharp judgment of partners, lived next to a diamond and stubbornly insisted it was a pebble. I used material metrics, social status, and the label of a $3,500 salary to price a human being. And I was wrong, catastrophically wrong. Regret began to surge like a tsunami. It wasn't just regret for failing to recognize his value, it was regret for how I treated him. Every word of contempt, every disdainful look, every heartless action my mother and I took over 4 years played back in my mind. They were as vivid as slow-motion film, and every frame was a knife twisting in my heart. A man who clings to his wife's skirt. Other than being handy, he's completely useless. I took pity on him and let him stay here out of charity. Those cruel words came from my own mouth and my mother's. We trampled on the dignity of a human being, a genius, a man who had likely been silently carrying this entire family all because of our own arrogance and myopia. Shame engulfed me. A shame so humiliating I just wanted to find a hole to crawl into. How could he endure all of that? Why did he never fight back? Perhaps his silence wasn't weakness at all, but a profound disdain for my petty, materialistic world. The car stopped in the underground parking garage of my building. I sat perfectly still in the car for a long time, not wanting to step out, not wanting to face reality. The apartment up there, the place that was supposed to be my home, now felt like a crime scene. A place where I had inflicted irreparable damage on that man. The pain in my chest grew more distinct. It wasn't violent, but a dull, agonizing ache, like thousands of tiny needles pricking my heart and liver. I knew this was the price I had to pay, and it was only just beginning. I opened the door and walked into the apartment. It was still messy and cold, just like the last few days. My mother was sitting on the sofa watching TV. Seeing me return, she hastily turned it off and asked with a worried face, "How did it go? Any news? Did you meet with them?" "What did they say?" I didn't answer. I walked over quietly and sat in the chair opposite her. I looked at my mother, the woman who birthed me, the woman who collaborated with me to create this tragedy. Her face still held the haughty arrogance of someone used to living in wealth, but her eyes reflected exhaustion and anxiety. I took a breath, trying to keep my voice from cracking. "Mom, I know everything now." And then I told her everything. I recounted every word Director Logan said, leaving out no details. I told her about Kyle being the valedictorian of MIT, about his algorithm worth hundreds of millions, about his actual income, about the National Security Project, and the 6-year NDA. My voice was flat and emotionless, as if I were reporting on a failed business venture. But every word spoken was like slicing a knife into my own flesh. My mother sat and listened, her complexion constantly changing. From surprise, it morphed into absolute shock. Her eyes widened, her mouth fell open, unable to utter a sound. When I mentioned Kyle's massive actual income, her hands began to tremble. And when I spoke of the 6-year NDA and his silent goodbye, her face went ghost white, drained of all blood. When I finished the story, the entire room sank into a terrifying silence. My mother sat as rigid as a stone statue. It was a long time before she could speak, her voice hoarse and broken. No, that's impossible. "You're joking, right, Kyle? That lowly tech guy?" "It's no joke, Mom," I replied, my voice full of bitterness. "It is the truth that we refused to look at for 4 years." "Oh my God." My mother let out a cry, clutching her head, her whole body shaking. Then, all this time, it could have been him funding this entire household? My mother's question was exactly what I had been thinking about. With Kyle's income being that massive, what did he use it for? He didn't shop, didn't party, didn't send a lot back to Ohio because his parents lived simply. It was highly likely that he had been secretly paying for the exorbitant living expenses of this household, for my designer bags, for my mother's luxury vacations. That thought multiplied our shame 100-fold. We didn't just despise him. We were living like parasites off the very person we looked down upon the most. My mother began to cry. Her sobs were full of remorse and humiliation. For the first time in my life, I saw my mother, a woman who was always strong and proud, collapse like this. She cried and beat her chest. Oh my God, what have I done? How did I treat him? I was blind. I pushed away a literal mountain of gold with my own hands. Watching my mother cry broke my heart. But I couldn't cry. My tears seemed to have dried up, leaving only endless agony and emptiness. My mother regretted chasing away a mountain of gold. But what did I regret? Did I regret his financial value? Or did I realize that I was truly, fundamentally wrong? Even in this moment, I couldn't be entirely sure. We both sat there, drowning in torment and self-blame. The truth was exposed, but it didn't bring freedom. It only opened a bottomless abyss of belated remorse. After that day, our lives completely changed. There was no more nagging or complaining. Instead, a heavy silence blanketed the house. The truth about Kyle was like a giant mirror, reflecting all our ugliness, selfishness, and myopia, making it impossible for my mother and me to look each other in the eye. But silence couldn't solve anything. The chaos of daily life continued, forcing us to face it. We couldn't live on takeout forever, nor could we let the condo turn into a landfill. One morning, I woke up early and stepped into the kitchen. I looked at the unfamiliar array of cooking utensils, feeling that this was harder than negotiating $1 million contract. I decided to start with the simplest thing, making chicken broth for my mother. I searched for recipes online, struggling with the chicken, the vegetables, the pot. The first time, it burned. The second time, it was as bland as water. My mother tasted a spoonful, said nothing, but I knew it was hard to swallow. She just quietly finished the bowl, an action she would have never done before. Then I started learning how to clean the house. I mopped the floors, scrubbed the toilets, washed the clothes. The chores I used to consider beneath me now drained all my physical strength. My hands, which were only used to typing on keyboards and signing checks, began to callous and ache. Once, I struggled for ages, trying to figure out the washing machine settings, eventually having to call customer service to ask. The agent on the other end must have thought I was bizarre. My mother changed too. She no longer sat watching TV or gossiping with friends on the phone. She started helping me with the chores. She hunched over on the balcony, learning how to revive her wilting orchids. She also tried to learn a few simple recipes. The kitchen, which previously only held Kyle's shadow, now became the place where my mother and I clumsily relearned the most basic lessons of life. But I knew doing these things wasn't enough. That was only compensating for the physical needs Kyle had met. As for his mental world, the world of advanced textbooks and complex algorithms, I still hadn't touched it. One evening, after finishing the chores, I walked into Kyle's room. I sat at his desk and gently picked up one of his specialized books, Artificial Intelligence, A Modern Approach. I turned the pages, trying to read, but the specialized jargon and the tangled mathematical formulas were no different from an encrypted code to me. I understood nothing. A wave of helplessness washed over me. It turned out the distance between him and me wasn't just a difference in our attitudes toward life, but a bottomless chasm of knowledge and vision. He lived in a world of logic, of grand ideas, while I drowned in a world of revenue metrics and superficial social networking. But I didn't give up. I was determined to understand his world. I started from the very basics. I registered for an online introductory computer science course. I bought beginner books on AI and programming. During the day, I went to work, and at night I came home and hunched over my studies and books. Many nights I stayed up late, my head spinning with foreign concepts. I didn't do all this, hoping he would come back and forgive me. I knew that was impossible. I did it as a journey of atonement, a belated effort to get closer to the real him, to tell myself that at least I tried, even if it was only after losing him forever. Time flew by. 4 months had passed since the day I learned the truth. My life and my mother's had settled into a new orbit, an orbit of silent repentance. The house was no longer messy, though it could never be as pristine as when his hands cared for it. Our daily meals weren't diverse, but they were adequate, prepared by our own clumsy hands. I still went to work, but I no longer threw myself into pointless after-hours parties. Instead, I came home to spend time with my tech books and online lectures. Despite my best efforts, I had no news of Kyle. He had evaporated from the face of the earth. I had tried every possible avenue. I sent emails to his old company address, called Director Logan several times, but all I received was silence or boilerplate responses. For security reasons, we cannot provide any information. Despair gradually replaced hope. I began to accept that I might never have the chance to say I'm sorry to him. Then, one Saturday afternoon, as my mother and I were cleaning the house, the doorbell suddenly rang. I opened the door and saw a stranger. He was in his 50s, solidly built, with a square, stern face. He wore a simple but sharply ironed suit. His eyes looked at me piercingly, as if he could see through all my thoughts. "Excuse me, are you Diana, the wife of Kyle Ningen?" the man asked, his voice deep and authoritative. My heart skipped a beat. Someone came looking for me and mentioned Kyle's name. "Yes, that's me. I am Agent Thomas," he introduced himself. "I am from Kyle's assigned agency." My whole body trembled. Kyle's agency. So it's real. Please. "Please come in and have some tea," I stammered. Agent Thomas walked in, his eyes sweeping the room. His gaze lingered for a moment on the bookshelf in the living room, where the new programming books I bought were stacked. My mother came out from the kitchen, looking surprised at the strange guest. I quickly introduced him. "Mom, this is Agent Thomas, a colleague of Kyle's." After sitting down, Agent Thomas got straight to the point without any pleasantries. "Miss Diana, I am here today under orders from my superiors. Recently, we have logged multiple attempts by you to initiate contact. By protocol, Kyle is on active duty for a special assignment. All lines of communication are severed. However, because you are still his legal spouse, we have a responsibility to verify certain matters to ensure no external factors negatively impact his work or psychological state." His words were severe and entirely official. I understood immediately. This was not a personal visit. They were here to vet me, to investigate. They were afraid I was going to do something to compromise Kyle or compromise that top-secret project. A bitter feeling rose in my chest. Even after he was gone, in their eyes, I was still a potential threat. Facing Agent Thomas's scrutinizing gaze, I no longer felt insulted like the old me would have. I only felt a profound sadness. I knew I had no right to demand their trust. Not after everything I had done. I took a deep breath, looked straight at Agent Thomas, and spoke, trying to keep my voice steady but unable to hide the tremor. "Sir, I understand. I understand the agency's concerns, but please believe me, I have absolutely no intention of doing anything to affect Kyle's work." And then, like a bursting dam, I began to pour my heart out. I didn't defend myself. I made no excuses. I recounted the entire story of the past 4 years. I talked about my short-sighted arrogance, about how terribly my mother and I treated Kyle. I admitted I knew nothing about who he truly was until he left. "I know saying this now is too late," I choked out. "I don't dare expect him to forgive me. I just want one chance, just one time, to be able to tell him directly, I am sorry. A sincere apology from the bottom of my heart, so he knows that I realized my catastrophic mistakes. That's all. After that, whatever he decides, I will accept it." My mother sat beside me. She had been crying for a while. She grabbed my hand, then turned to Agent Thomas, her voice breaking. "It's my fault. It's this old woman's fault." I pressured Diana. "I treated Kyle terribly. He is a good, gentle boy. And I truly regret it so much, sir. If only I could turn back time." The room sank into the sound of my mother's muffled sobs and my silence. Agent Thomas sat still. He didn't interrupt, just listened quietly. His stern eyes seemed to soften slightly. He looked at the tech books on the table, looked at my somewhat roughened hands, looked at my mother's tears of remorse. It seemed he was witnessing a different story, than what he had been briefed on. A long time later, he spoke, his voice losing some of its initial coldness. "I have heard your story. I have no right to judge your family's private matters. However, I acknowledge the sincerity from you and your mother." He stood up, preparing to leave. "I will report the full contents of today's conversation to my superiors. I cannot promise anything, because rules are rules, but I will accurately relay your request." Before walking out the door, he stopped and added one last sentence. "Kyle is a precious asset to this country, but he is also a human being. We always want our personnel to have a solid and stable support system at home. I hope you understand." The door closed. My mother and I sat in the living room, our hearts filled with a chaotic mix of emotions. Agent Thomas's words promised nothing, but they planted a fragile ray of hope in my heart, a hope that maybe, just maybe, a miracle could still happen. A month passed. The meeting with Agent Thomas faded into an agonizing wait. Every day I lived between hope and disappointment. Every ring of the doorbell, every unknown phone call, made my heart skip a beat, but nothing happened. The spark of hope Agent Thomas had left in me began to die out. I told myself I was being delusional. A national security project, a strict NDA, how could there be an exception just for the belated apology of a guilty wife? I had almost given up when, one afternoon, exactly a month since his last visit, Agent Thomas appeared again. He had the same stern demeanor, but this time, I felt something different in his eyes. "Hello, Diana," he said after sitting down. "I am here to deliver a decision from my superiors." My heart seemed to stop beating. I held my breath, waiting. After reviewing the report and weighing multiple factors, specifically the human factor, "As I mentioned, my superiors have decided to grant a special dispensation," he said slowly. "You will be granted a meeting with Kyle." I couldn't believe my ears. I stammered, "Really? Truly, sir?" "Yes," Agent Thomas nodded. "But the meeting will be held under extremely strict conditions. You will have exactly 2 hours. You will be transported to a designated location, and you must comply with all our instructions. Before the trip, you will have to sign another non-disclosure agreement. You absolutely cannot disclose anything you see or hear to anyone. Do you agree?" "I agree. I agree to everything," I answered hurriedly, tears already welling up. 2 hours. Just 2 hours. But to me right now, it was more precious than anything in the world. Agent Thomas handed me a file and a pen. "This is the NDA. Please read it carefully and sign." I don't need to read it. My hands shook as I signed my name on every page. The price for this 2-hour meeting was another legal binding, but I didn't hesitate for a second. "Pack your things," Agent Thomas said after taking back the file. "A car will come to pick you up early the day after tomorrow. Remember, do not bring any electronic devices. Only bring essential personal items." He left, leaving me alone with overwhelming joy and paralyzing anxiety. I was so happy I cried. Finally, I had my chance. But immediately after, panic set in. What would I say to him? Where would I start? Is an apology enough for 4 years of trauma? I stood in front of my closet, looking at my glamorous designer clothes, feeling totally alienated from them. What should I wear to meet him? A stunning dress to show him I was still doing well, or simple clothes to show my repentance? Everything became a tangled mess. I realized what I feared most wasn't that he wouldn't forgive me, but that when I stood in front of him, I wouldn't be able to express what was in my heart. Early that morning, I woke up before the sun even rose. I hadn't slept all night. I chose the most simple outfit I owned, a white button-down shirt and beige slacks. No makeup, just my hair tied back neatly. I wanted him to see the real me right now, stripped of the shell of the arrogant executive. Right on time, an unmarked black SUV parked outside my condo building. Agent Thomas was in the passenger seat. I greeted him, then sat silently in the back. The car rolled away, taking me on a journey to an unknown destination. We drove for a very long time, leaving the crowded city, getting onto the interstate, and eventually driving for hours until we reached a private airstrip. After a long flight and another drive through barren, desolate terrain, the scenery outside the window turned into the vast, sweeping desert of Nevada. After what felt like an eternity, the car turned onto a small dirt road, flanked by rugged terrain. Deeper in, we passed through 2 security checkpoints manned by heavily armed military personnel. Finally, a modern complex, surrounded by multiple layers of barbed wire, appeared in the middle of a valley. The place exuded an aura of solemnity and extreme secrecy. This was Kyle's world. The car stopped in front of the main building. Another agent led me inside. We walked down long, silent corridors, went through another security check, and finally, I was brought into a small room. The room had only a table and 2 chairs. No windows, just bright white fluorescent lights. "Please wait here. You have exactly 2 hours," the agent said, then left, closing the door behind him. I sat down, my hands tightly clasped in my lap. My heart was pounding erratically. I heard footsteps approaching from the hallway outside. The door opened, and Kyle walked in. He was leaner and tanner than before, but he looked solid and healthy. His hair was cut short and neat. He wore a dark blue utility uniform, but the biggest difference was his eyes. His eyes no longer held the resigned, silent look of the past. They were sharp, focused, radiating a strange, powerful confidence. He was no longer the shadow in my house. He was a completely different person. He didn't look surprised. It seemed he had been briefed. He pulled out the chair and sat opposite me. Calm. His calmness shattered me. All the words I had prepared in my head suddenly vanished. I looked at him, the husband who was simultaneously a stranger and so familiar, and the tears just started falling. "I'm sorry." That was all I could choke out through my sobs. "I'm sorry, Kyle. I am so truly sorry." I cried. I cried for all my stupidity and selfishness. I told him how I discovered the truth, about the remorse my mother and I felt, about how I started learning to cook and clean, and even how I was trying to read his books. "I know it's too late. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just want you to know that I understand now. I was wrong," I sobbed. Kyle sat still, patiently listening to me cry. He didn't interrupt, nor did he show a single ounce of emotion on his hardened face. He just looked at me, his eyes deep and still as an autumn lake. That stillness was more terrifying than any reprimand. When I ran out of tears and couldn't say anything more, he finally spoke. His voice was deep and even, lacking the hesitant timidity of the past. "I heard you. I don't blame you, Diana." His words stunned me. "He doesn't blame me? How is that possible?" He continued, and every word he said felt like needles piercing the very last of my illusions. "I understand why you and your mother treated me the way you did. You were raised to be a successful woman, to view everything through the lens of material value and social status. And I was just a small-town tech guy making $3,500. In your world, I had no value. That is normal." He paused, looking straight into my eyes, and delivered a devastating truth. "You know what, Diana? Your regret right now. It doesn't stem from you actually understanding who I am. It stems from you discovering my new value. You regret it because you realize the pebble you always looked down on was actually a diamond. You are crying not because you hurt me, but because you lost something valuable." I sat dead inside. Every word he said was the absolute truth. I couldn't deny it. Where did my change begin? It began the moment I heard Director Logan's words. Yes, I regretted losing his value. "What I used to wish for from you," his voice grew slightly distant, "wasn't for you to acknowledge my brilliance or how much money I made. That didn't matter to me. I only hoped that one day, you would look at me and accept the real me. Accept a man who likes cooking for his wife, who likes fixing things around the house, who likes reading his own books. I waited for a simple acceptance like that, but for 4 years, I never got it." He let out a very light breath. "We live in 2 worlds with vastly different value systems, Diana. It's no one's fault. We just don't belong together. The only thread tying us together is a marriage certificate. And perhaps now, that has no meaning either." He delivered his final verdict, gently but immovably. "I think after this project is over, we should release each other. Let's just say we met, and now we part, so both of us can have peace of mind." The 2 hours were up. The agent walked in and announced it was time. I stood up, my legs drained of all strength. He stood up as well. Before I turned away, he added one final sentence. "Live well, Diana." I didn't answer. I walked out of the room, walked out of his life, carrying a shattered heart, but also carrying a belated and painful understanding. He was right. Everything he said was right. I returned to New York like a person without a soul. That brief meeting had taken everything from me. My mother saw my state and instantly knew the result. She didn't ask anything. She just quietly made me a bowl of plain oatmeal. The two of us sat in silence. There were no more tears of remorse, only a brutal acceptance. We reaped what we sowed. Life went on, but inside me, there was a void that could never be filled. I still went to work, still managed my campaigns, but everything seemed to have lost its meaning. The revenue numbers, the praises from partners, the luxurious galas, it all became dull and tasteless. I realized the values I used to chase were actually entirely hollow. 6 months later, one morning, I received a thick envelope delivered by certified courier. Inside were divorce papers and several asset transfer documents. Kyle had already signed them. He asked for nothing in the split. The luxury condo we lived in, the car I drove, the savings in the bank, even the corporate stock options that Director Logan had mentioned, he left it all to me. He walked away, empty-handed, cutting ties cleanly and decisively. It was his final act, demonstrating the difference between his world and mine. He didn't need those things. I picked up a pen, my hand not shaking in the slightest. I signed my name on the divorce papers. One stroke of the pen ended a 4-year marriage, ending the biggest mistake of my life. Since that day, I have lived alone. My mother, after a period of depression, moved back to our hometown in the Midwest to live with relatives. She said she wanted to find peace where she was born. I didn't stop her. The massive condo now holds only me. Sometimes, in the evenings, I still go into his room and sit reading the books he left behind. I am still learning. Not to understand technology, but trying to understand a world that I had once bluntly rejected. I paid a terribly expensive price for my lesson. I held the most precious man in my hands, a silent, endlessly forgiving love. But I threw it away myself, all because of my own arrogance and ignorance. True love doesn't lie in flashy, superficial values. It comes from understanding, cherishing, and accepting each other for who we truly are. I understand that now, but it is far, far too late.